Barely Research Facts is a fact-based podcast brought to you by ArtNowThus, an experiential arts agency based out of Mumbai. Each week, we pick a word at random, dive into it, and see what it brings to us. We are your hosts. My name is Ragini, and this is Shar. Let's go. Hi guys, and welcome back to another episode of Barely Research Facts.
Hello.
Today's word is actually a suggested word to us. It's actually a derivative of a suggested word because we decided the word that was suggested was too broad and might just take away from future episodes. So the word is pasta, and the word was actually originally was suggested to us was food. There was just so much in it that we just decided to cull it down to subsects, and over the course of much time, we will cover different aspects of food and always fondly remember the suggestion.
Yeah. And thoroughly enjoy all the episodes.
Yeah. It's also tough to research words based on food because you get hungry.
In fact, just before the recording, I was stuffing my face. So,
yeah. It's very hard to go do your research and just be like, yeah, okay,
Snack.
I'm just going to stick to my diet as I do this research. That's not going to happen. But on a side note, food, the word was suggested to us by our friends at Far From Fact, which is an amazing comedy podcast. And if you haven't heard it, you must hear it. It's hilarious. They're very, very funny. Pasta is an offshoot of a conversation on Instagram with them and their suggestions. So diving in. All right. So I'm going to start with the etymology of the word pasta, like always. But really quickly, so apparently the first attested use of pasta in English dates back to 1874, which seems to have come from the Italian word pasta, which in turn comes from the Latin word pasta.
Yay, thank God something it's pronounceable.
Yeah, there was a reason why I wanted to do this segment so badly. The Latin word comes from the Latinization of a Greek word, also pasta by the way, but that translates loosely to barley pollen.
Was the Greek word a Greekification of something?
No, that's very end. I'm not going further than that. That's done. The reason why pasta gets the name that it does is because, the flour that you use to make pasta, based, which is out of this particular kind of wheat called durum wheat, has a very specific pasty texture when it is first mixed. And so from there, it kind of, potentially could also take on its name from pasty texture just becoming pasta. Or it could just take on its name from, going from English to Italian to Latin to Greek to whatever, and just being called pasta across all languages.
And that's the etymology, folks.
Apparently, I did not know this, but there are apparently over 310 shapes of pasta, and there are over 1,300 documented names for different kinds of the history of pasta and how it sort of has come onto our plates as it has today. And so, for most of us, while we do know, we think that pasta is Italian, and it is pretty much a staple food in Italy. The history suggests that pasta may not have originated in Italy, and it may have actually come in from the Middle East to Europe.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So a particular myth around discovery of pasta is attributed to Marco Polo, who was an explorer back in the 13th century, and that pasta was brought from China to Italy. And this is possibly a misinterpretation because Polo mentioned in his book called Polo's Travels
Simple.
a tree from which something like pasta was made. So this is probably a kind of a palm called the sago palm. So shout out to our episode on palm. It produces a starchy food basically that could potentially resemble the stringy nature of pasta, but it's obviously not, it's not a tree that grows pasta. The food reminded him of pasta in his own home country. So obviously if it reminded him of something that it means it already existed in Europe at the time. Even in, the 13th century when Marco Polo was on his travels, there is reference from a soldier in a northern Italian city who owned a basket of macaroni. A century before this, there's a Muslim geographer called Al-Idrisi who wrote of seeing pasta produced in Sicily. Roman era references to anything resembling pasta are kind of scarce, but it is very likely that the dish took a hold in Italy because of extensive trading across the Mediterranean, especially in the Middle Ages. And so from the 13th century, you start seeing references to pasta dishes like, macaroni, ravioli, different kinds of pasta that start cropping up more increasingly across the Italian peninsula. And from the beginning of the 16th century, pasta dishes were somewhat they were different from what we're eaten today because not only was pasta cooked longer, so while, in today's day and age, we have a preference for al dente pasta, which is sort of slightly
undercooked.
It's just pasta that's just got a bit of a bite to it. Back then, pasta was cooked longer. And it was also mixed with ingredients that we would actually not see today. And I will come back to a little more on that later, but just how elaborate pasta recipes were. But safe to say that up to about the 16th century, pasta was considered a dish for the wealthy. And it was only something that you would see at aristocratic banquets. There is a papal chef in the middle of the 16th century called Bartolomeo Scappi, And he created a third course for a banquet consisting of boiled chicken accompanied with ravioli filled with a paste made of boiled pork belly, cow udders, roast pork, Parmesan cheese, fresh cheese, sugar, herbs, spices, and raisins.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds great.
Definitely not pasta that we're used to eating today. He also had an equally elaborate recipe for macaroni, which was flour and breadcrumb dough mixed with goat's milk and egg yolk and flattened into a sheet, which was then cut into thin strips with a roller cutter to make the noodles. After being left to dry, the macaroni was boiled for half an hour, strained, and covered with grated cheese, slices of butter, sugar, cinnamon, and pieces of a particular variant of mozzarella cheese. The dish was finally baked in the oven for another half an hour with a little rose water so the cheese would melt, while the macaroni was imbued with the flavor of the spices. And so this was another preparation for pasta and macaroni. I mean, I think a very elaborate macaroni and cheese. And back in the 16th century, an author called Giulio Cesar Croce put macaroni on his list of fattening foods. And I'm not surprised that happened. So, of course, and it was only around the 17th century that you sort of start seeing pasta becoming more commonplace and more, sort of regular people beginning to eat pasta as much as the wealthy were consuming it. And until the 17th century, people from Naples had been nicknamed leaf eaters. And
is that like a slur?
Yeah. In the 1700s, they started being called macaroni eaters instead.
Oh, so moved up in life?
Yeah,
I don't know.
Several reasons why pasta suddenly became so popular. One of which is that it was easy to eat at a time when, especially for religious reasons, if a lot of people weren't eating meat, and also meat was more expensive. So suddenly pasta became this really nice sort of substitute food and gained popularity. But also a very likely cause for the dramatic spread of pasta at the time was that industrial pasta production developed with the use of machines. And so it was easier to make, to just make your noodles or your vermicelli.
Yeah, and it fit in with lazy human beings.
Yeah, always mother of all invention. They say it's necessity, but actually it's just laziness. Of course, over time, the way pasta is made has changed. Primarily pasta is, savory now. We don't add so much. There isn't stuff like cinnamon and sugar in your pasta these days. And apparently in the 19th century was the first time when tomatoes were added to a pasta. So it is not until 1844 that you first see the recipe for spaghetti and tomato sauce. I did not know that. So, yeah, apparently the Italians consider tomatoes too exotic to put them in their pasta, so it was just kept out for a very long time. And that is the brief history of this fascinating dish.
Cool. When you were talking about help from machines to make pasta, I found this little footnote in history that I don't know if anyone or everyone knows about, but apparently Thomas Jefferson was particularly interested in pasta.
Ooh.
Yeah. I didn't know much about him other than he was an American president, but he was also apparently an inventor. He's designed, among many other things, a swiveling Windsor chair, a folding camp stool, an improved plow, a revolving clothes rack, a folding ladder, an encryption apparatus, and the great clock and mechanized double doors that still graces home at Monticello. So he was an inventor, as that huge list will tell you. And one of the things that he invented was a pasta extruder. Well, he drew up plans for it. I don't know if it ever came into existence. And also, he can't be claimed to be the first person to do it because people have been using extruders, like you mentioned in your history segment, for a while. But he designed one, and there's a diagram and everything, and also notes that go along with it that describe how it works. And also, apparently, Jefferson can be held responsible for popularizing macaroni in the US. So in the late 1700s, 1785 to 1789, he was apparently minister to France, and he acquired a taste for continental cooking, and pasta was one of those things. He had like a little note talking about how pasta was made, and, it must have been so interesting to just go to this foreign land and taste this thing that you have never tasted before, learn about how it's produced.
Just be like, this is yum.
Yeah. So when he was president, which was in the turn of the century, 1800, he apparently introduced macaroni to America by serving it at a lot of parties to his guests. I'll finish the segment off with a food review from 1802.
Okay.
So it says, it's from William Parker Cutler and Julia Perkins Cutler. It's there from their memoirs. They say, dined at the president's. Dinner not as elegant as when we dined before. Among other dishes, a pie called macaroni was served, which appeared to be a rich crust filled with the trillions of onions or shallots, which I took it to be, tasted very strong and not agreeable.
Wow. Cut to today when everybody's eating macaroni and cheese right out of the, I don't know, some ready-to-eat packets everywhere.
Yeah. So that's the story of Thomas Jefferson.
Also, by the way, side note, there is a really cute bit of history on how the song Yankee Doodle came about and why the phrase Yankee Doodle stuck a feather in his cap and called it macaroni came about in our episode on hat. And you should go check that out because it is amusing to say the least. Okay, so I'm going to take a bit of a spin on the word pasta and move a little bit away from the food to another really interesting thing that I kind of came across. And I don't know if people knew of this before. I definitely didn't. So I used to live in Bombay. There was a story of a girl and she was a friend's friend. Apparently a friend's friend, someone had heard of this story. So Bombay is known for notoriously small flats. Real estate is through the roof and most people live in like really, really tiny apartments. And especially when you're young and just about like, beginning your careers and salaries are low, your apartments are
like a hovel.
Particularly tiny, yeah. And so, so like every other young working professional, she had a little sort of studio place to herself. And she'd gone out with a friend one night and it got late. And so they both decided to come back and she told her friend, why don't you just crash at mine? And I will, just leave in the morning because it's late and why do you want to travel back at this time? So he comes home and she had a box bed in her apartment.
Okay.
And they, sort of go to bed and it's a small place. And at around 3 a.m, her friend woke her up and he's screaming at her. He's just like, and he's having this massive fight with her and she can't understand what's going on because he's just being incredibly aggressive and she's obviously like, she's a bit startled. She's also a bit scared because it's 3 a.m. and she's alone with him and he drags her out of the apartment and throws her out. And the whole time he's just telling her, you need to get out. I need you to get out. I want to go for a walk. I just need to get out. And she can't understand why this is happening. And he pulls her out of the apartment, shuts the door behind him. And as he shuts the door and she's just looking at him stunned and he's like, I don't want to say this inside, but there's somebody in the bed.
Why are you telling me these stories?
So what happened is that there was this man who was basically taken a fancy to her and had bribed the maid for the key, had gotten into the apartment, and when he realized that she came back with somebody, he hid inside the box bed. And at night, her friend started hearing noises from inside and realized that there was somebody there. And therefore, he created the whole ruse to just pull her out of the apartment because the apartment was too small for them to like hide in another room or something. And then, got out. Now, the reason why I tell you the story
is because you never want me to sleep on a bed ever again? Because that's what's going to happen.
True. It did happen to me for a while. But it's also, the versions of the story have popped up with multiple, everyone's got a friend who's had this experience. It varies from being like, it usually centers to Bombay, but like I've also heard people in Bangalore have similar versions of the story. The story varies from what was the reason why the guy woke her up in the middle of the night. Some say that he said that I absolutely have to get a sandwich right now. I need to go out and get a sandwich. And the story varies. So obviously it's urban legend, right? It's not really happened and nobody really knows. Okay. So it's a phenomenon on the internet and it's called creepypasta.
Yeah.
And it's basically, the creepypastas are horror-related legends that have been copied and pasted across the internet.
Yeah.
So it's a portmanteau. It is of the words creepy and copypasta, like copy pasted, and it has been around since about the early 90s actually, when the first versions of creepypasta came about. And this could be urban legends like this, which is just like, stories that have just gone around and people have heard it and, somehow it's gone viral. Yeah. It's those, those chain emails that we used to get when we were younger, which is like, oh, if you don't, so-and-so ghost, whatever.
I even got chain letters,
That you had to send to 10 people, like take a photocopy and send.
Yeah, yes, Ragini. In the age of the dinosaurs, you couldn't copy paste things. Yep, you had to actually write by hand.
Oh, wow. That's commitment to not dying.
Yeah. Not to say that I did it. My laziness overtook my fear of being dead.
I'll take my chances.
Yeah, I'll take my chances. It's fine.
So usually these stories they're brief, user-generated. They're always paranormal stories. They usually there's some sort of element of the paranormal or something like just slightly bizarre. It's intended to scare readers. Most of the times they will include gruesome details of murder, suicide, otherworldly occurrences. And in fact, the exact origins are unknown. Like I said, initially at least most creepypastas were written anonymously and were routinely sort of reposted. So it sort of makes it difficult to identify who started it off and how did it kind of gain traction. But there is a sense of, having sort of emerged in the 1990s when email chains and internet forums begin to sort of come into existence.
That glorious legacy of the internet, the forums.
And usually creepypastas will always be, it's always a friend of a friend. It's always someone you sort of may have known because it has to have some element of it sort of adds to the element of believability. And then, it just started gaining traction, and now there are just it's just all over the internet and it's just a thing. In fact, in 2010 is when, according to Time magazine, the genre had its peak audience when it was covered by the New York Times. In Time now, however, where originally creepypastas used to usually be anonymous, now sort of authorship has become increasingly important. Most creepypastas are attributed to particular authors, and it's become less and less common to just copy-paste stuff because as IP laws become more stringent and people are just sort of copy-pasting someone's piece of work and not putting a name to it, does now constitute intellectual theft and is taken more seriously.
Boring. Let's copy paste more stuff.
Yeah. So there is a particularly interesting creepypasta story with a character called the Slender Man. He was created by a user called Eric Knudsen, also known as Victor Surge on his Something Awful forum. He's depicted as this really thin, unnaturally tall humanoid with featureless head face, wearing a strange kind of black suit. Stories of the Slender Man usually feature him stalking, abducting, or traumatizing people, particularly children. And he's just sort of appeared in multiple works of fiction, most typically composed online. But it became such a phenomenon. Creepypasta was just it became such a craze, and it was just sort of the stories that spread so quickly across so many varying age groups that it actually led to a fairly tragic incident in Wisconsin in 2014, where two 12-year-old girls, Anissa Weir and Morgan Geezer, lured their best friend, Peyton Leutner, into the woods and stabbed her 19 times in an attempt to become proxies of the fictional character.
Wow.
The incident took place at a forest nearby, and during a game of hide and seek, they basically pinned her down and stabbed her 19 times in the arms, legs, and torso with a 5-inch long blade. She did survive, luckily. The two friends then told her that they would go and find help, but they just ran away and didn't come back. And she somehow dragged herself to a nearby road where she was found by a cyclist who then called 911 and got her to a hospital. Eventually, Peyton was fine and she recovered, so it was all right. But both Weir and Geezer were found not guilty by mental disease and were committed to mental health institutions for sentences of 25 years and 65 years.
Yeah, that's insane. There's a really good episode on Case File, the podcast, that covers this in great detail. I recommend you go check it out because it's covered really well, and it's scary. Don't copypasta. Don't read copypastas. So I was looking this up, and if you're Italian and you know about this, please tell me if I'm making no sense. But apparently there's an Italian decree of 26 July 2017, and it's called the Italian Purity Pasta Law. And let me just explain a little bit of the background to you. So it goes without saying, pasta is inherently Italian now. It leads the world in pasta making, in the excellence of pasta, and all these amazing other things related to pasta. It's also obviously known for quality food. Now, how do you regulate that? Why would you is in my head, why would you? But in the Italian government's head, we need to, and let's introduce a law. And this law is aimed at protecting this iconic dish. The first version dates back to 1967, and it was the regulation of the manufacturing and marketing of cereals, milling products, and bread and pasta, which, pun intended, is quite a dry topic. But, I guess someone's got to do it. So apparently in 2017, Italy adopted a decree aimed at including the country of origin of the primary ingredients on all types of durum wheat pasta labels. So this meant basically all the manufacturers had to declare where it was made. The new legislation applies to domestic producers of all types of durum wheat pasta, like I said, but not to fresh and stabilized pasta, nor to milling products and pasta destined for exportation to other EU member states. So, so that means that if someone else is getting it, it's okay. But if you're planning to sell it within Italy, it needs to pass a certain standard, and you need to tell people where it's from, how it was made, etc., and whether it's actually durum wheat pasta. The big finale is failing to provide this information is punishable with a fine of up to 9,500 euros.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Obviously, there are people who are going to oppose this because not only is it really stringent and it sort of handcuffs pasta manufacturers into selling exactly what they want, where they want to. It was challenged by a number of Italian pasta producers who feared that it would mean further expense in pasta production. And despite that, it has been upheld by the Italian Administrative Court. But If you're selling in the EU, you're fine to hoodwink your customers. But if you're selling pasta in Italy, good luck. The original law governing pasta was passed somewhere in 67, like July of 67. But the one that is in its latest form was put forth in 2017 and upheld in 2020. Interesting.
It's amazing how much legal hassle food can come into.
Yeah. On the topic of sensitivity to pasta-related topics, a historic Italian pasta maker and the fifth most popular brand in the country, it's called La Molesana. Apparently, it sparked outrage recently because they created a marketing campaign for several pasta shapes with their original names from the 1930s that, whether intentionally or unintentionally, celebrated Italy's colonial past. Okay. Now, I'd want to be in the room where they decided to do this marketing campaign, because if there was someone in the room who was thinking, maybe this isn't a good idea, they didn't say much at the time. So they recently launched a new line of products that resurfaced some like historic pasta formats named to celebrate Italy's colonies in Africa. One of the names is Abyssini.
Ooh, so bad.
I mean, it is not passing full judgment on whether it's right or wrong. You've got to know how it's going to be received by people in this day and age. You have to know.
Yeah, also just not something that you do anymore. Like, no.
But yeah, so one of them was called Abyssini, celebrating the occupation of Ethiopia. Tripoline, celebrating the occupation of Tripolitania, now part of Libya. Asabesi, from the city of Asab in Eritrea. And Bengasini, and those are some of the names. The historical origins of the products are narrated on the packaging, and they're described as having, quote, a definite lictorian flavor and, quote, a colonial taste.
Ooh. Oh my God.
If you, like me, are wondering, what is lictorian?
No, I've got it.
Lictorian, never heard this word. So I looked it up, and it's of or relating to a lictor. Now, if you're as confused as I am still, I dug deeper for you. A lictor is a Roman functionary who carries fasces, not to be confused with feces, who carried fasces when attending a magistrate in public appearances. He's also described as a Roman official who carried the fasces and assisted magistrates in making arrests and carrying out sentences. Now, if you, like me, are wondering what fasces are,
yeah,
I'll tell you. They're a bundle of rods bound together around an axe with the blade projecting that is carried before ancient Roman magistrates as an emblem of authority. Now, I'm going to just say it. I'm as confused as I was before I started looking up this word. So we're going to leave it there. If you can describe to me what lictorian means in layman's terms, because that's what I am, please do.
So you know what I thought lictorian meant, actually, when you first said
What?
it? I thought it was a pun on Victorian, but like lick because like, I don't know, finger licking or something. So that's what I was going for.
You know what? Scratch everything I said. Let's go with that. I like how you took that word and made it KFC-ish. Like, so in conclusion, the brand defended itself, saying its marketing strategy had been quote-unquote naive. Talking to an Italian newspaper, Rosella Ferro, marketing director at La Molesana, said that its new branding had no intention to celebrate fascism or Benito Mussolini. We had no celebratory intentions when we talked about these historical formats born in the 1930s. And having said that, they changed the name from Abyssini. They're now called Conchigli Regate number 25, which is Italian for shells. And yeah, that's the end of that. They withdrew the controversial products for temporarily from the market, changed the name of the pasta shape.
That was a short-lived marketing experiment.
Yeah, an expensive one, I'm sure.
So going from short-lived marketing experiments to long-standing hoaxes in the world of pasta. On April Fool's Day in 1957, BBC current affairs program Panorama apparently showed a family in southern Switzerland harvesting spaghetti from the family spaghetti tree. At the time, spaghetti was sort of unknown in the UK, and a lot of British people weren't aware that spaghetti was made from wheat, flour, and water. Suddenly, the BBC was inundated by calls asking for advice on how they could grow their own spaghetti trees.
Oh, bless them.
Yeah, sweet. So the news report was produced on April Fool's Day as a joke. It presented a family gathering this bumper spaghetti harvest after a mild winter and a virtual disappearance of the spaghetti weevil. Weevil is apparently it's a kind of a beetle. And footage of the traditional harvest festival was aired along with a discussion of the breeding necessary to develop a strain to produce the perfect spaghetti noodle length. Some of the scenes were filmed at a pasta foods factory in London, which is now closed, and at a hotel in Switzerland. So apparently, the cameraman of Panorama, Charles de Jager, dreamed up the story after remembering how his teachers at school in Austria would tease his classmates for being so stupid that if you told them that spaghetti grew on trees, they would believe it. That's where he got the idea from.
Aww.
He then went to the editor of Panorama and told him that he wanted to do this, and he gave him a budget of £100 and said, sure, knock yourself out. And they used a broadcaster, Richard Dembleby, who was apparently a very respected broadcaster at the time.
Yeah, he is. Dean's parents talk about him a lot.
Yeah, okay. So apparently Dembleby was totally sold on the idea and just went at it with relish. And, they just had everybody in the UK believing that this thing was real and wanted to grow their own spaghetti trees. And many, many, many decades later, CNN has now called this broadcast the biggest hoax that any reputable news establishment has ever pulled.
Wow.
So interesting little insight into the sense of humor at the BBC, I guess.
Speaking of senses of humor about pasta. So have you heard of this religion or this, I don't know, I don't want to offend like a whole bunch of people and they come after us with pitchforks, but I'm going to say pseudo-religion called Pastafarianism.
But how I do know of this is because when we first decided that our word for this episode is going to be pasta, first thing Shara told me before we even started looking up this, Pastafarianism is mine.
Yeah, you've got to dibs these things.
Yeah.
So Pastafarianism is, like I said, a pseudo-religion. In 2005, a gentleman called Bobby Henderson, with a great sense of humor, he was only 24 at the time, sent an open letter regarding the flying spaghetti monster to the Kansas State Board of Education. Why did he do this? So this was set against the backdrop of the Kansas evolution hearings. There are a series of hearings held in Topeka, Kansas, in the United States by the Kansas State Board of Education and its State Board Science Hearing Committee. None of these are important. What you need to know is they wanted to change how evolution and the origin of life would be taught in the state's public high school science classes. And this is something that's ongoing. This is in that particular state. It's a topic of contention because things have been proposed, they've been retracted, they've been amended. It's a mess. It's a huge mess. Okay. But the hearings raised the issues of creation and evolution in public education and were attended by all major participants in the intelligent design movement, which basically means it's just a summary of that is that God created us. That's what the movement purports. Now, let me set the stage for you. The Kansas evolution hearings were happening around 2005. What are they, you ask, because you don't know? Well, they were held by the Kansas State Board of Education, and they basically wanted to change how evolution and the origin of life was taught in the state's public high school science classes. So obviously a very touchy topic, especially in a state where Christianity is so deep-rooted. So the whole issue is quite contentious in on its own. And then enter Bobby Henderson, a 24-year-old at the time. He was a physics graduate. He sent an open letter regarding the flying spaghetti monster. Yes, that's correct. You heard me right. The flying spaghetti monster to the Kansas State Board of Education. I won't read the whole letter out. I recommend you go read it. But basically, he just satirized creationism by professing his belief that whenever a scientist carbon dates an object, a supernatural creator that closely resembles spaghetti and meatballs is there, changing the results with his noodly appendage. Henderson argued that his beliefs were just as valid as intelligent design and called for equal time in science classrooms alongside intelligent design and evolution. The letter was sent prior to the hearings as an argument against the teaching of intelligent design in biology classes. So basically it came down to evolution versus creationism and, just Bobby Henderson inserting himself in there with his great sense of humor. So he described himself as a concerned citizen representing more than 10 million others. Basically atheists apparently, and argued that intelligent design and his belief that the universe was created by a flying spaghetti monster were equally valid.
I'm buying it, to be honest.
I do too. I think around the time when I was in college, which is around, just shortly after this happened, it was all the rage. Everybody who even minutely subscribed to atheism was like, oh, I'm part of the church of FSM now. Yeah, I'm Pastafarian. Put a colander on my head and that's it. That's me for life. Because that's apparently one of the things that the followers do is put a colander upside down over their head as a hat. So,
wow.
Yeah.
There has been thought put into it. You can't deny that.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it is, as you'll see from some of my descriptions of how the law has reacted to it, it is definitely satire. It's not, created completely in entirety on its own. It's created as satire of Christianity, very clearly, as you will soon find out. So in May 2005, having received no reply from the Kansas State Board of Education, I wonder why, he posted the letter on his website and it gained significant public interest, obviously, #the internet. Shortly thereafter, Pastafarianism became an internet phenomenon and he received responses from the board members. So 3 members of the board, all of whom opposed the amendments, responded positively to Pastafarianism. A 4th board member responded with the comment, "It is a serious offense to mock God," which was to be expected. And since then, it's gained a huge amount of followership, apparently garnering tens of millions of hits on his website and over 60,000 pieces of fan mail. Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about the gospel. Okay, now the gospel elaborates on Pastafarian beliefs and practices. The gospel includes a creation myth, a set of 8 "I'd really rather you didn't," which mock the commandments, I'm assuming, and guide to evangelizing and discusses history and lifestyle from a Pastafarian perspective. And this was in March 2006. It's September of 2005, before he received an advance to write the gospel, a Pastafarian member, clearly all of these are extremely creative people, known as Solipsi, announced the beginning of a project to collect texts from fellow Pastafarians to compile into, quote, the loose canon, the holy book of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster.
Loose canon.
Yeah. And one of the quotes from it is blasphemous, but I will say it nonetheless. It says, "Since you have done a half-ass job, you will receive half an ass." The great pirate Solomon grabbed his ceremonial scimitar and struck his remaining donkey, cleaving it in 2. And it's attributed to Slackers 151-52.
I really want to know what are the festivals they celebrate.
Since October 2008, the local chapter of the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster has sponsored an annual convention called Skepticon, and it's in the campus of the Missouri State University. So they don't necessarily have like religious festivals. They do satirize already existing religious festivals. For instance, they have a festival called Ramendan, where they only eat ramen and they end their prayers with the phrase ramen.
Oh my God.
Yeah, blasphemous to say the least, but creative, it makes you giggle. Yeah, and another quote from the loose canon that I'd like to put in here. It says, "I'm the flying spaghetti monster. Thou shalt have no other monsters before me." In brackets, afterwards is okay, just use protection. "The only monster who deserves capitalization is me. Other monsters are false monsters, undeserving of capitalization." So, yeah.
Oh.
Now, just to wrap things up, the final judgment in November 2005, the Kansas State Board of Education voted to allow criticisms of evolution, including language about intelligent design, as part of testing standards. And then promptly on February 13, 2007, the board voted to reject the amended science standards enacted in 2005. So, yeah, still a raging battle.
Oh, wow. No, I love that. I love that. It has everything I want from a religion. Good food, great puns. What more do you want?
Yeah. Okay, so I want to talk about Dan Pashman. Now, why is Dan Pashman important to this episode?
I'm going to hazard a guess and say he had something to do with pasta.
Yes, good job. He's created a new pasta shape. He spent years apparently on researching the perfect pasta shape, coming up with it for a series on his podcast called Sporkful. So his intention was to make the ideal pasta shape. And how do you define ideal? He defines it as having the perfect bite, an appealing texture, and holding the right amount of sauce. Ooh. Yeah, and he came up with a shape called Cascatelli, which means waterfall in Italian. Yeah, and he made thousands of boxes of this pasta and they were sold out soon after he released them. He defines, okay, now this gets a little ridiculous, but he has qualifiers for why this pasta is good. These qualifiers are forkability, which is how easy it is to get a pasta shape on your fork and to keep it there. There's sauceability, which is how well a sauce adheres to it. And then there's tooth sinkability. I can almost feel the rage of all the Italians. But
You know what? I can feel that pasta piece in my mouth right now.
oh,
I think these are good benchmarks.
yeah, if they make you drool and want pasta, then I guess it's good, right? So tooth sinkability is how satisfying it is to sink your teeth into, obviously. He does recognize that they are definitely pseudoscientific words. He is very self-aware. Yeah. And he's working on mass producing more of this type of pasta because apparently the demand has been through the roof.
I don't blame it. This has been quite an episode, huh?
Yeah, we need to go eat now. I know I've just eaten breakfast. And on that note, we'll see you next time.
Yes, we will see you next time. If you've enjoyed the episode, please subscribe, share, tell your friends, review, all of that. Soon, guys. Bye. Okay, that's it for today. The episode you just heard was edited by Mohit Chandelier. Music for the episode is by Charita Arora. If you'd like to reach out to us about the podcast, the episode, or you just want to say hi in general, we're on Instagram as Barely Research Facts. You could also come to the website at www.artnowthus.in. If you like the podcast, review, subscribe, and please share it with other podcast lovers in your circle. It would mean so much to us. Until next time, bye.